Hey, how we doing, everyone? Welcome back to Nova Combat. So today we're going to be discussing black belts and pretty much why they are absolutely meaningless in today's martial arts community, sport, whatever you want to call it. Black belt used to be held in such high regard by the vast majority of martial arts practitioners, and even people who weren't martial arts practitioners. They also appreciated the fact that this individual had a black belt. That was a big deal. It represented a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of work and dedication to a martial art. And that is their reward, this accolade that they have, this black belt. And the problem is these days is there's too many black belts out there now. Or should I say that black belts are more easily accessible than they ever were before. It's kind of diminished the value of what a black belt actually has in certain respects. So one thing that a black belt doesn't do, it doesn't mean that you are a good fighter. And we will do a video in the near future about what martial arts actually teaches you if it's not fighting. We'll go into more detail about that in a future video. But just because you have a black belt doesn't mean that they are a good fighter or you are a good fighter. And if anything, it might actually give an individual a false sense of security when it comes to their overall abilities. It might make them a little bit overconfident with what they can do. Now, from my experience, I mean, gaining a black belt actually should have the opposite effect. It should actually make you more aware of the dangers of fighting and why fighting should be avoided wherever possible, unless it is absolutely necessary to protect yourself or to protect a loved one. Those are the only occasions where fighting should be allowed in your psyche, in your psychology, the way you feel about the whole violence of fighting. It should be something that you steer away from. I mean, it's really funny how the martial arts style that I am a third Dan black belt in is Wado-ryu karate, and Wado-ryu means the way of peace and harmony, which kind of sounds a little bit ironic considering that it's about fighting. It's violence, you know, you're learning violence, you're practicing violence. But that's not really what it's about. It's supposed to teach you that violence causes more problems than it solves, and how actually knowing that should make you a more peaceful person, understanding the dangers of fighting, not being ignorant about what fighting actually does or how it actually impacts you or how it impacts other people. Understanding that should make you steer away from violence. And I think that's a message that not many people seem to understand when they get involved in martial arts to begin with. They seem to think it's about fighting and learning how to fight, learning how to protect yourself. Yes, learning how to protect yourself, but also not to actively seek violence out and not necessarily protect yourself physically, trying to find ways out of certain situations that may become violent, you know, things like that, trying to calm situations down, trying to pacify people instead of riling people up, or instead of you getting riled up. It's not really about that. It's about the exact opposite of that. But anyway, we're kind of going a little bit off track there. Black belts, in a lot of ways these days, are given away to a lot of people. And because martial arts, I mean, some people have made really successful businesses of martial arts, but you seem to find a certain trend is that the martial art gets watered down quite a lot, especially when you're looking at something that is a little bit more traditional, like Wado-ryu, or I don't know, even Chinese martial arts, Wing Chun, what have you. It's never as simple as gaining members and developing their skills or nurturing their enthusiasm. It's more of a case of maximizing the profits from those members rather than being a student-focused school or establishment. And for me personally, with my gym, I do this for the love of the sport, all right? But don't get me wrong, we do need members to succeed, and we need members to continue doing the good work that we do. We want the club to grow, because the more it grows, the more people we can actually help, the more people this idea goes out to. We can start competing against those clubs that don't really have their hearts in protecting or developing the students. I mean, we help a lot of people. We give people purpose in life outside of the stresses that you encounter in everyday life, school, work, whatever it might be. Even home life can be stressful for some people, bullies and things like that. Joining a martial arts school should give everyone an escape from that as well. And I like to try and provide that kind of service as much as possible, to almost provide sanctuary for people where they can escape the stresses and anxieties of life and focus their minds on something that is more enjoyable, that releases that anger, that frustration. And when everyone goes home at the end of an evening, everyone's feeling a lot better about themselves and everyone's feeling much more positive about life. That is basically how we teach people. We're very, very student focused. We honestly, our rates are quite cheap compared to a lot of martial arts establishments these days, and that might be to our detriment. But the fact remains that we are not business driven, we are student driven. If there is an interest in the martial art and people want to excel in martial arts, then that is what we're there to nurture, that is what we're there to provide. But a lot of schools, unfortunately, they will have membership schemes where, a student pays a sum of money, £1,000, maybe more than that, and they are guaranteed, at that transaction, they are guaranteed a black belt after a certain period of time. Now, let me tell you how long a black belt should take for everyone. I don't care what martial art it is. The time it should take you to get a black belt should be at least 3 to 4 years. At least 3 to 4 years. And that is kickboxing. Just kickboxing. All right? When it comes to karate or when it comes to traditional arts, getting a black belt in one of those arts can take you as much as 10 years, as many as 10 years to get a black belt. One of our students, both of our recent black belts who graded last year, one of them has spent over 10 years training with us, and the other spent over 20 years. However, they were training on and off, and they were doing other things as well in the background. But that is how long this process should take. If it doesn't take that long and you rush it, you're never actually going to learn what you are supposed to learn. And even though our grading structure is very traditional based, I actually prefer teaching all of my students outside of grading seasons. So we normally tend to have 3 to 4, maybe 5 gradings per year. But it's in between the gradings is when we actually get a lot of the learning done, the proper learning done, rather than reading stuff off a syllabus and trying to get the students to perfect what is on a syllabus. And even though that is part and parcel of a grading and a traditional martial art in a lot of ways, for me, trying to bridge that gap between traditional martial arts and modern day combat sports or self-defense scenarios is more important, in my opinion, than the syllabus. But unfortunately, as with a lot of martial arts these days, they have this belt structure, and you've got to try and award students belts somehow. And you have to be able to assess the students in one way or another to grade them. You have to be able to find a way of marking them in a certain way that means they pass or they don't pass. And that is one of the biggest issues with that kind of system, is that it can be manipulated in such a way that a student, depending on how corrupt the martial arts instructor themselves might be, or the institution, the club, the association, whatever the case might be, depending on how corrupt they are, well, it might just be a case of slipping in a few extra quid into the instructor's back pocket, and they will give you priority treatment. They will put you forward for gradings that you're not necessarily ready for. They will assess you more favorably than other students. Things like that are practices that unfortunately happen quite regularly. And if you are looking to get involved in traditional martial arts, this is one of the things that I'd advise anyone look out for, is this kind of membership scheme where you are guaranteed X amount of progression by paying X amount of money. All right, that should not be the case. Progression should be based on the individual, and it should be based on their ability and how prepared they are to learn, how much they are prepared to train outside of the dojo, because that's something else entirely. There's unfortunately never enough hours in the gym to practice everything that you need to know for a martial art. So training outside the gym is just as important as training inside the gym. But it's one of those things that unfortunately you are seeing more and more, because people, they might have an interest in martial arts to begin with, so they think, okay, I'll open up my own gym. But what happens is they realize that it doesn't make a lot of money, so they have to try and incentivize new members by guaranteeing them certain grades or guaranteeing them a black belt or something like that by X amount of time to try and draw in members. And I think when it comes to kickboxing, it's a lot easier to justify, because kickboxing is a sport, all right? There's not a lot of traditional elements to kickboxing, if any. And even though kickboxing is the sport version of karate, kickboxing was born out of karate, it's a totally different martial art in its own right. And what students are being graded on are far more, it's far more generic techniques than what they are in traditional karate. Traditional karate is far more rigid. There's a lot more attention to detail in Wado-ryu, but also in other styles of karate as well, that in kickboxing isn't necessarily as important. And so I think there's a lot of wiggle room when it comes to getting a black belt for kickboxing. But even so, if you are truly committed to kickboxing, it shouldn't take a year. It shouldn't take 6 months to reach a black belt. And unfortunately, that's all that kids these days, they think about. They think they like the idea of having a black belt, but they don't want to work for it. They don't understand how difficult it is to reach that stage. And so you get them complaining to their parents or what have you, and their parents will try and convince the instructor. I've had this before myself, where I've had parents tell me that they'll pay me a little bit of extra money to grade their student a little bit better, to pass them more regularly, to progress them faster than anyone else. And I reject it. If anything, I actually kick out those students. I don't want them in my gym. Simple as that. My gym is not the place for those kinds of people. But you see it more and more often. So what can you do to combat this? All right. Well, first is be aware what kind of clubs you are joining. A lot of the bigger ones, but actually this also applies to smaller clubs as well. They will ask for a significant amount of money up front. So it could be 500 quid, it could be £1,000, it could be $1,000, $1,500. It really does depend on the establishment itself. And from that, then they will put you through a certain number of gradings throughout that year. And the only thing they'll put you through is gradings. That's it. They'll teach you syllabus stuff, and that is it. They won't teach you anything else. They'll just put you through all that just to make sure that you can get to your belts to fulfill their end of the bargain, their end of the contract. And then that is it. If that is the process, walk away. Save your money, walk away. Try and find something that is a little bit more local. Try and find something that is a little bit more homegrown, something a little bit more where passion is more of the driving force behind martial arts success rather than profit. A club like ours, we're not about profit whatsoever. Try and find a club like ours. I know they might be difficult to come by, but they do exist. I know plenty of instructors out there that have similar kind of ethics to us, and they want students to progress on merit, not because of how much money they can pay them. And that can be really difficult to find, I'm not going to lie. It's a case of putting your trust in an instructor that they have your best interests at heart and that they care about their students, not just in the dojo, but also outside the dojo. I am friends with every single member of my gym, and I'm proud to be a part of their social group. You know, it does give me a lot of pride that I am not just a martial arts instructor to these people. I'm also one of their friends, and we hang out socially and things like that. That's something that you only get from legitimate instructors who actually care about their students. Anyway, again, a little bit of a sidetrack there. So one other thing as well, if you feel like as if you've been through that process and you've got that first Dan black belt and you're really happy with it, well, don't just stop there. Why are you stopping at a first Dan black belt? If you truly are committed to the sport and you want to excel in a martial art, go beyond that. Go and do that second Dan. Go and do that third Dan. This has been the biggest issue with our club ever since its inception. Before I was running things, my own instructor had the exact same issue, where there were students that were motivated to get to their black belt, and they would think that is the be-all, end-all, and then they quit. It's really annoying how I know my students have actually spent time and effort earning their belts, but they don't have as much value as they used to. Getting that second dan or third proves beyond any shadow of a doubt that you are a serious martial arts practitioner, and that's when a black belt actually means something. And if you know that you've worked hard to reach that first dan, then don't be put off by this video, all right? You know in your heart of hearts that you have put in that effort, you have done the 5-10 years of training to get to where you are. That is something to be proud of. Unfortunately, in the eyes of a bigger audience these days, martial arts has a lot of exposure now. It's just not enough anymore to make you stand out as a martial arts practitioner. You have to be at that second dan level or above these days. I mean, why? Why put all that effort in just to give it up? Especially when there is so much more to learn. That's the issue that I find with grading structures and syllabus structures, is that there's not a lot of wiggle room outside of the syllabuses to train the students in things that are arguably more important. And that's one of the things that I try telling anyone that is getting close to a black belt, is that there's more to learn from us than just what is on the syllabus. There's so much more to learn, both traditionally and also outside of the traditions, more on the self-defense stuff, more on the sparring side of things. There's so much to learn, but unfortunately that is kind of the culture that we're in at the moment, where a black belt is the end goal, when actually that is just the beginning of your martial arts career. Ask any instructor that and they'll tell you the exact same thing, I promise you. But anyway, everyone, thank you so much for joining me on today's video. I hope this has been interesting. And if there's one thing you take away from this video, if you are going for your first dan or going for a black belt, don't just go for a black belt. Look beyond that. Look to your second dan, your third dan. Keep up your training, because the longer you do the training, the more benefit it will have for you in your well-being, your health, your lifestyle. It will really help with a lot of things outside of your gym, not to mention that you can actually now legitimately call yourself a black belt and be proud of it. But anyway, thanks again. Take care. Leave a like, get subscribed. Let us know what you think down in the comment section below about how valuable you think black belts actually are in this day and age of martial arts and martial arts practitioners, martial arts excellence. And we will catch you all in the next video. Have a good one.